Hi everyone and welcome to Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans True Aussie Murders Caffeinated. I'm your host Belinda Brady and welcome guys, welcome to episode 13. And today's episode is titled I've Got the Munchies, David and Catherine Birnie. Now, heads up straight away. This episode talks about rape and murder and it is pretty gruesome. So if this is not your thing, that is okay. You don't have to listen to me. I'm not your girl. You can find another podcast to listen to and I will not be insulted. But if this is your thing, then settle in, guys, because this tale is an absolute doozy of a tale and has gone down in Australian history as one of the worst acts of murder committed by a couple. Okay, now first up, my sources are news.com.au, Murderpedia, news.yahoo.com, and Yahoo, for those not familiar, is spelt YAHOO. News.com again and news.com again. Now, I am drinking today Pepsi Max. So I'm sticking with my caffeine, but I'm drinking Pepsi Max because it is just too hot for coffee. In my part of Australia, it is very humid, very hot, and the thought of having a hot drink just makes me want to break out into a sweat. So I'll be sticking with Pepsi Max. And today I have my executive producer, Little Milo, in the studio with me today. So if you hear some noise, some rustling in the background, dog noises, that is just my EP making sure everything's going okay. All right, guys, so let's get stuck right into it. So get yourself comfortable, put me on pause, get yourself a drink, a hot drink, a cold drink, depending on where you are in the world, or even a stiff drink, because this tale, like I have said before, is an absolute doozy. So get yourself sorted and then come back to me. Okay, welcome back to me, guys. So let's get started. So every now and then the stars collide and two perfect people meet and they will happily stay together forever, and we would probably call them soulmates. And they would agree. They can't live without each other. They are perfect for each other in every way. They love doing everything together. They are never apart. But also every now and then the stars will collide and two of the most vile, sadistic and evil people will find each other and discover that they like the darker things in life. And not only do they like it, they both decide to act out on their most sick fantasies. Now, these two people somehow found each other and not only discovered that they like to hurt people, but they quickly discovered they like to do it together, and they are good at it, really good at it. And I don't say that in a complimentary way. I say that in they set their sights on somebody and they followed through in the most horrific and brutal way. This was the case with the couple I'll be talking about in this episode, a couple who both developed and shared a love for kidnapping, raping and murdering young women, with the couple eventually confessing to killing 4 young women but being suspected of being involved in the disappearance of many more, with the woman involved not only helping select their next victim, but would then cheer on her beloved as he was raping and torturing their captive girl, only deciding that it was time for the poor girl to die when her jealousy became too much, or when her partner had decided he'd had enough of his victim, and rather than let her go, she went along with it. It was only when one of these poor girls managed to escape that these two absolute monsters were finally caught and the true extent of their killing spree would become known. Episode 13 takes us to the west coast of Australia and a state called, funnily enough, Western Australia, and a suburb called Willagee. Now, Willagee is around 15 kilometres or 9 miles southwest of the capital of Western Australia, which is called Perth. And the focus of today's episode is a couple called David and Catherine Birnie and the horrific crimes they committed on innocent young girls and women in their home on Morehouse Street in Willagee. Now, the media would dub the murders, the Morehouse murders. And, if the walls could talk in that house, the horrific things they could tell. But as always, there is a beginning to how a person becomes a killer and finally acts on that feeling of wanting to do it. And this case is no different. So, let's start with David. David John Birnie was born on the 16th of Feb 1951 and was the eldest of 5 children. He and his siblings grew up in a suburb called Wattle Grove, and the family was remembered for being severely dysfunctional. The house was reportedly filthy. The mother was an alcoholic who would give taxi drivers sexual favours in lieu of a fare, and there were rumours of incest in the family. Now, in the early 60s, the family moved to another suburb of Perth, and it was here that he met Catherine. David left school at 15 to become an apprentice jockey at nearby Ascot Racecourse, and it was said that he was often physically cruel to the horses and harmed them. And that was where he first really displayed his exhibitionist tendencies. It was also where he committed his first rape, where he broke into an elderly woman's home and raped her. Now, by the time David was an adolescent, he had been in and out of jail for various felonies, and as an adult, he was a known sex and porn addict and married his first wife, and the couple had a daughter together. Catherine Birnie was born in 1951, and she was only 2 years old when her mother, Doreen, died giving birth to their little brother, who died 2 days later. Unable to cope, her father, Harold, moved him and Catherine to South Africa, where he allegedly abused her, and then eventually she was taken back to Australia to live with her maternal grandparents at the age of 10. When her grandmother had an epileptic fit and wasn't able to care for her anymore, Catherine was shipped off to her aunt and uncle's place in a suburb called Lathland. There, a smart and charming wild teen, her age, a young man named David Birnie, lived next door, and before long they'd met, they'd fallen in love, and they were in a sexual relationship. But fate would intervene, if only for a moment in time, as Child Protection Services separated the Birnie children and David was sent to live elsewhere. But that didn't stop the couple reuniting, and eventually in the mid-60s they got back together. Now, David was said to be a sexual deviant by this stage and was said to want sex every day, otherwise he would, quote, go mad. Once he had gone a few days without sex, he asked his brother if he could have sex with him, which the mortified brother refused. Later that night, this same brother awoke to David trying to have sex with him. Now, David and Catherine were committing petty crimes together, and in 1969, aged 18, the couple were charged with breaking and entering of a safe at a local drive-in. David went to prison, but Catherine was pregnant, and she was pregnant to another man, so she was put on probation. David got out in 1970, and the couple went on to commit more thefts. Now, David was hauled back to jail, and Catherine was sent to a detention centre for 6 months, her baby taken away from her. Upon her release, she got her baby back and secured work with the well-respected McLaughlin family as a nanny, where she fell pregnant to one of the family's sons in 1972, and they got married on her 21st birthday. The couple went on to have 6 children, which would have been 7, but tragically Donnie Jr., one of Catherine's sons, was hit and killed by a car in the family's driveway, a tragedy that Catherine witnessed. Her husband Donald hurt his back at work, and the family needed to move into government housing. Now, Catherine floundered at being a housewife, and the children absolutely ran wild. The family was falling apart, but all this was about to change when the couple were reunited again. They ran into each other in 1983, and the couple started having an affair. In 1985, Catherine left her husband and kids, all 6 of them, the youngest only being 3, and moved in with David, who I can only assume left his wife or vice versa. And though the couple never legally married, Catherine changed her surname to Birnie by deed poll. Now, the couple moved into number 3 Morehouse Street, Willagee, which was a working-class suburb of Fremantle. David scored a job selling parts in a records yard, which was a convenient 4-minute drive from their home. Neighbours considered the couple quiet, and they kept to themselves. But inside the house was a different story, as David was a massive pothead who took heroin and prescription drugs regularly, and his sex addiction, for want of a better word, showed absolutely no signs of waning, and he reportedly wanted sex 6 times a day. And apparently he would inject anesthetic into his penis to extend the life of his performance so he couldn't feel it, so he could keep going. I guess some kind of early version of a hillbilly Viagra, if you like. Now, David was also unable to stop stealing and went to jail here and there for theft, and it was around this time that he told Catherine of his rape and murder fantasies, and saying that if she helped him, she too could have the sexual gratification that he was having. Now, I know what you're thinking. Most of us would go to the police if our partner confessed that's what he or she wanted to do. I don't even know how you bring that up in conversation. Hey, been thinking about raping and killing, want to come? Yeah, sure, when can we do that? I don't even know how you bring that up in conversation, and how you as a decent human being could go, sounds like a great idea, when can we start? But we are not dealing with decent human beings. And we are dealing with a woman who was so obsessed with her partner, she would have done anything to keep him happy, and sadly, she did. And so in September 1986, the Birnies put their sick plan into place and put an ad in the local paper advertising a spare room in the hope of luring victims. The ad read, urgent, looking for a lonely person, prefer female 18 to 24 years, share single room flat. But the Birnies didn't have to wait for a reply to their ad, as a beautiful young 22-year-old woman by the name of Mary Neilson had approached David in the car wrecking yard that he was working in to buy some car tyres. Now, Mary was a pretty girl and studying psychology at the University of Western Australia, and was hoping to score a job as a counsellor with community welfare when she graduated. Her parents were out of the country holidaying in the United Kingdom at the time. Now, spotting a potential victim, David, always on alert, suggested Mary visit him at his home, and he'd cut her an even better deal. Now, David, he's your average-looking bloke. He's not attractive, not burly. He's just your scrawny. You wouldn't look at him twice. You certainly wouldn't think he was a threat. So she took him up on the offer, and on the 6th of October 1986, she showed up at his house, where she was warmly invited in. Once inside, she was seized at knife point, bound and gagged and tied to a bed in the spare room. David repeatedly raped the terrified girl, as an enthusiastic Catherine watched on, asking him what was turning him on and what he liked. After they'd had enough of Mary, they took her to Glen Eagles National Park, where David raped her once more and then choked her with a nylon cord that he tightened with a tree branch, all while she begged for her life. As she was being choked to death, David stabbed her and dumped her body in a shallow grave. He told Catherine that stabbing her would help release any gases and help her decompose quicker. With a lust for blood already growing by the day after this, the Birnies struck again only 2 weeks later, and this time it was a pretty 15-year-old girl by the name of Susanna Candy. Now, Susanna was an outstanding student at Hollywood High School, and she lived in Nedlands with her parents, 2 brothers and a sister. Her father was one of the top ophthalmic surgeons in Western Australia, and I do hope I've said that right. And he didn't approve of her part-time work in a restaurant, but she did it anyway, and he usually met her after work, after her shift had ended, to drive her home safely. But for whatever reason, on October 20, 1986, Susanna was making her own way home and was spotted by the Birnies, who had been cruising around looking for the next victim. When Catherine spotted someone she liked, she would say to David, "I've got the munchies," and this would give him the sign that it was time to get this person. And when she spotted Susanna, that's exactly what she said. The Birnies approached Susanna and offered her a lift, and Susanna, reassured by the kind face of Catherine and a woman in the car with the man, she happily accepted the ride. Within minutes of being in the car, the mood changed dramatically and a knife was pulled on the terrified teen. She was driven back to the Morehouse Street house where she was gagged, chained to the bed and raped. After the raping had ended, Catherine climbed into bed with David and a petrified Susanna, because she knew exactly what pushed David's buttons, and that was Catherine helping or joining in. Now, this went on for a few days, and once both of them had had enough, after the poor girl had been raped by the pair of them, David tried to strangle her, but she went absolutely berserk. Susanna went absolutely berserk and started screaming, desperate to shut her up and desperate to not have her draw attention to them. They shoved sleeping tablets down her throat, and once Susanna was out, David got a cord around her neck and asked Catherine to prove her love for him by finishing the teen off. Catherine obliged and strangled her until she stopped breathing, with David watching on. When asked later why she did it, Catherine replied, "Because I wanted to see how strong I was within my inner self. I didn't feel a thing. It was like expected. I was prepared to follow him to the end of the earth and do anything to see that his desires were satisfied." She was a female. Females hurt and destroy males. They then buried her body not far from where they buried Mary Neilson, in a shallow grave in Eagle Forest. Before this, however, the Birnies had Susanna write a few letters to her family telling them she was having some troubles and just needed some time to herself and not to worry. They posted one after they buried her and one 2 weeks after that. But the family weren't convinced that their daughter was just off somewhere clearing her head, and Susanna's family reported her missing to police. The police, however, believed she was just a runaway and weren't in too much of a hurry to find her. But the Birnies weren't bothered, as they were on the hunt again, and this time it was 31-year-old Nolene Patterson who was their next victim. Nolene was an extremely popular and attractive woman, and she had been an air hostess for the now extinct Ansett Airlines, which was an Australian airline that went bankrupt, out of business in the 90s, but they were a big airline in Australia for a very long time. And she had also been an air hostess on the private plane of Australian business tycoon Alan Bond. Nolene had been working at the Netherlands Golf Club as a bar manager and had lived in Bigton with her mother when her car broke down. Conveniently, the Birnies pulled up and offered to help her, and Nolene was relieved, as the couple had only helped her wallpaper her room, so she was familiar with the Birnies. They'd helped her out. They were good people. And she gladly, happily accepted the lift and hopped in the car. Again, the mood changed within minutes of her jumping in that car. She had a knife to her throat and was driven to the House of Horrors on Morehouse Street, where she too was gagged, chained and repeatedly raped. The plan was to kill her that night, but David kept putting it off and kept her for 3 whole days, which fueled a jealous rage in Catherine, as she knew he liked her and couldn't bring himself to kill her. Eventually, Catherine gave David an ultimatum. It was her or me. And David eventually forcibly forced sleeping tablets down Nolene's throat and strangled her while she was out. They buried her with the other victims in a shallow grave in Eagle Forest, with Catherine reportedly kicking sand in the dead woman's face as they did. The killing spree continued, with the couple kidnapping 21-year-old Denise Brown on the 5th of November as she waited for a bus on Stirling Highway. And like the victims before her, she too was taken to the House of Horrors on Morehouse Street and gagged, chained to a bed and repeatedly raped. The couple left her in that bed and kept her for 2 days, and at one point they forced her to call her parents and tell them that she was okay. And after a few days of being held captive, Catherine decided she'd had enough of Denise and it was time for her to go. So the couple packed her up in their car, in broad daylight, mind you, and drove her to Wanneroo Pine Plantation, where David raped her in the car once more while they waited for night to fall. When it did, David dragged Denise from the car and cut her throat, all while still sexually assaulting her. Convinced she was dead, David threw her in a shallow grave that had already been dug for her, and to their absolute horror, Denise started breathing, gasping for breath. David hit her over the head with a shovel, but Denise started breathing and moving again, still gasping for breath. David then killed her with an axe by striking her in the head with it. And once he knew that she was absolutely positively dead, he continued to throw dirt on her now dead body. After this ghastly scene, Catherine wanted to stop. For some reason, the axe, David taking to Denise with the axe, was the final straw for her, and she wanted to stop. She couldn't do it anymore. But David, high on raping and murdering for 27 days, wanted to go again and again. But luckily for us, and unluckily for them, it was this last attempt that finally brought the couple undone. On the 17th of November, a very drunk 17-year-old Kate Moyer was hitching along Stirling Highway trying to get home after a night out with friends, and she happily accepted a ride from a harmless-looking couple, Catherine and David, who just happened to be driving past. She was driven to her family home. For whatever reason, I couldn't work out, and I couldn't find out why they did that. But when she tried to get out of the car, she noticed there was no door handle, and David quickly produced a knife and held it to her throat. The petrified teen asked if she was going to be raped or killed, to which David replied, "We'll only rape you if you're good." Kate also heard Catherine say, "I've got the munchies. Have you got the munchies too?" Taken to Morehouse Street, Kate was made to shower, smoke pot, and watch movies. She was also forced to dance to the Dire Straits song Romeo and Juliet in front of the Birnies. David raped her just after midnight, with Catherine watching on, taking notes. Kate was also made to write goodbye letters to her loved ones and was showered, moved to the master bedroom, and raped again. David handcuffed her to his ankle and gave her pills to take, but unbeknownst to the couple, Kate hid the tablets under her tongue and put them under the mattress when no one was looking. Now, the next morning was Monday morning, and David had to be at work, so Kate was unchained and forced to call her parents and tell them that she had gotten really drunk the night before and she was just at a friend's sleeping it off. David told her if she didn't do this, and if she didn't do it convincingly, she would be murdered just like the others. Kate also took the opportunity of hiding her lipstick and a piece of paper with her phone number as proof of her being in the house in the lounge room if the police ever came looking. Now, David left to go to work and left Kate with Catherine. Catherine led Kate back to the master bedroom after she had called her parents and was in the process of chaining her back to the bed when there was a knock at the front door. Now, distracted, Catherine went to answer it, leaving Kate still unchained. Now, seizing her opportunity, Kate scrambled. She climbed out that bedroom window and ran as fast as you absolutely would run, clad only in black tights and a singlet. Desperate for help, she tried 3 houses, knocking on their doors, but nobody was home. And she managed to get to a shop and alert a rather startled looking man who was standing outside the shop to help her. She managed to convince him. She told him that she had been captured and raped, and also said, if a woman comes here and says I've had a fight with her and I am her daughter, don't believe her, I've been raped. Luckily for Kate, the man believed her and took her to Fremantle Police Station, where she explained to her ordeal at the hands of a man with a long hooked nose and a woman with a permanent frown on her face. She also told them she had left clues of her presence at the house. When police arrived at the Morehouse Street home, no one was there, but Catherine, who was possibly out looking for Kate, arrived soon after and was arrested. David was arrested at his work and taken into custody, where the couple were interviewed in separate rooms. Now, they didn't say much, they didn't give themselves away, but the only thing David had to say about Kate was that she had willingly gone to the couple's home to smoke pot and have sex with him. The interview stretched well into the evening, and eventually one detective trying to call David's bluff said, "It's getting dark. Why don't you just show me where the bodies are so we can dig them up?" And to the detective's surprise, David replied with, "Okay, there is 4 of them." When Catherine found out that David had confessed, she did too, only too eager to confess her horrific actions to the horrified police. Now, Catherine went on to tell police about the brutal murder of Denise Brown and how it had absolutely scarred her, and it was something that she didn't want to be part of again or ever see again, and she was worried if the killings didn't stop, they might never stop, and she had made a half decision to leave Kate unchained and give the girl a chance of escaping. She told police, quote, "I think I must have come to a decision that sooner or later there had to be an end to the rampage. I had reached the stage when I didn't know what to do. I suppose I came to a decision that I was prepared to give her a chance. I knew that it was a foregone conclusion that David would kill her and probably do it that night. I was just fed up with the killings. I thought if something did not happen soon, it would simply go on and never end. Deep and dark in the back of my mind was yet another fear. I had a great fear that I would have to look at another killing like that of Denise Brown, the girl he murdered with the axe. I wanted to avoid that at all costs. In the back of my mind, I had come to the position where I really did not care if the girl escaped or not. When I found out the girl had escaped, I felt a twinge of terror run down my spine. I thought to myself, David will be furious. What shall I tell him?" Police took the couple on a drive to where the bodies were buried, and one by one their victims were found. When the body of Nolene Patterson was found, the girl that David actually really liked, Catherine, and the girl that Catherine was insanely jealous of, Catherine actually spit on her. On the 12th of November, David and Catherine appeared at Fremantle Magistrates Court charged with 4 counts of murder. Public outrage was high and police checked the bags of every member of the public who attended the hearing, and the holding cell where the couple were held were heavily guarded. The couple had no representation and no plea was entered, with the bail being denied and the pair to remain in custody. When asked where she wanted to go for the days before her next court appearance, Catherine looked at David and said, "I'll go where he goes." On the 10th of February 1987, a huge crowd gathered at Perth Supreme Court as the couple arrived in prison trucks. They arrived to the angry crowd yelling, "Hang the bastards and string them up." And when Catherine got out and faced the public, her face and expression were as cold as ice. Chilling even. The moment clearly had no impact on her. And you can actually Google the photos of her at this court appearance, and she's chilling. She is absolutely chilling. And if you are looking at this if you are viewing my podcast via TikTok or Instagram, I have actually put these photos there for you to see. She's a scary, scary woman. Catherine also went ballistic when she first appeared at the top of the staircase of the holding cell beneath the court. She fought against the officers trying to hold her. She spat venom at them, and the only thing that would calm her down was when she saw her beloved David. A court reporter reported that when David was being read the horrific charges against him, Catherine bent forward, stretched out her hand, and gently stroked the ball of David's thumb behind his back. David pled guilty to all charges, sparing his victims' families the pain of a dragged-out trial. David saying, "That's the least I could do," when questioned as to why he pled guilty. Catherine was awaiting the results of a psychiatric assessment, so did not have to enter a plea at that time. David Birnie, the man who so willingly raped, tortured and killed women, so willingly, happily did it, stood trembling in the dock as his sentence was passed. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mr. Justice Wallace said in sentencing, "The law is not strong enough to express the community's horror at this sadistic killer who tortured, raped and murdered 4 women. In my opinion, David John Birnie is such a danger to society that he should never be released from prison." His bravado returned only for a minute, however, when he was led from the prison to the van, the angry mob awaiting for his return, where he blew them a kiss. Unsurprisingly, Catherine was found sane enough to plead guilty, and on the 3rd of March 1987, she stood in the dock holding David's hand and chatting to him as the details of the horror they inflicted on their 4 victims were read to the court, and how they were able to even touch in court is beyond me. And she too was sentenced to life in prison, with a psychiatrist stating she had, quote, "the worst case of personality dependence I have seen in my career." Mr. Justice Wallace said in his sentencing, "In my opinion, you should never be released to be with David Birnie. You should never be allowed to see him again." Life in jail wasn't rosy for David, with the scrawny serial killer beaten up repeatedly by other inmates, and he was eventually moved to Fremantle Prison's old death cells for his protection. Now, amazingly, he and Catherine continued to communicate via letters, but their requests to marry or verbally talk were refused. Now, the couple claimed that their separation was causing physical and mental distress and may lead to suicide, but, that tiny violin didn't work because the law again refused their requests. In 1993, David's personal computer was taken away from him as it was found to have porn on it, and he was also accused of sexually assaulting another prisoner. In 2000, Catherine's first husband, Donald, the father of her 6 kids, passed away. Catherine requested to attend his funeral but was refused. Now, on October 7, 2005, David Birnie, then aged 54, was found dead in his cell from suicide. He had hung himself from the air conditioning vent in his cell using a length of cord that he probably got from the prison's garment section. He was buried on the 21st of November at Pinaroo Cemetery, Western Australia, in an unmarked grave at the expense of the taxpayer via a secret pauper's funeral, because I dare say if word got out that the public was paying for his funeral, it would not have happened. Apparently, his antidepressants were delayed and Catherine had stopped writing to him, leading authorities to believe that his depression had spiralled quickly and rapidly, which led to his suicide. Catherine, however, had decided she'd had enough of being in jail, and wanting her freedom, decided that the best way to do that was to cut David off, just distance herself from him. She thought being away from him and cutting him off was her best chance of getting out of jail. And this is what she did. She cut him off leading up to his suicide. She didn't return his letters, never wrote to him. Now, she started to show remorse and sorrow for her victims during this time and took up painting. And I kid you not, she took part in jailhouse plays, where in one play she actually played a nun. I'm not even joking. In 2007, she applied for parole where she was rejected. She applied again in 2013 and she was rejected again. Now, a Perth QC, Tom Percy, at the time repeatedly called for her release because she is, quote, a quiet church mouse, end quote, and keeping her locked up is, quote, pure revenge, end quote. However, the chief investigating officer of the case, Paul Ferguson, disagreed. He said at the time, "I honestly believe that a woman has never given those victims 1 ounce of consideration, both the dead victims and the families of the victims. She's an actor. The person I met is all for herself and she will do whatever is necessary. They were parasites who lived off each other, the most evil people I've ever come across." In 2016, the victim who got away, Kate Moyer, launched a petition to end victims' re-traumatisation by their attackers repeatedly being able to apply for parole. And in 2019, Western Australia Attorney General introduced a new law into Parliament that rules around even the worst offenders, like Catherine, could not apply for parole every 3 years like she had been. Kate Moore also found an unusual ally in her fight to keep Catherine in jail, Catherine's son Peter. Peter said knowing his mother was a serial killer had emotionally destroyed him and he wanted to help where he could. Now, Peter was 6 when his mother abandoned him and his siblings for David Birnie. And in 2017, he told Yahoo 7 that she had written them letters saying that she loved them and she cared about them and she missed them. But he was certain that it was because she was up for parole and thought she could manipulate one of her children to help her get it by saying that they would look after their mother if she was released. He told reporters he didn't want his mother out of jail and supported the death penalty. Now, there is no death penalty in Australia in any state at all. It's been abolished. We don't do it. We should in some cases, but we don't. And when asked if Catherine died, he responded, "It wouldn't bother me. It would be 30 years of stress off my shoulders." And when asked if he had any last words for his mother, he simply replied with, "Hurry up and die quickly." Catherine Birnie is currently serving her life sentence in Bandyup Women's Prison, Western Australia, and is not eligible for parole. And I think it's a safe assumption to say that jail is where Catherine Birnie will see her days out and where she will die. So there we have it, guys, the tale of David and Catherine Birnie, 2 sadistic, evil, awful people who, for whatever reason, fate kept bringing back together time and time again until they went on to kill 4 innocent, beautiful women for no reason other than their own sick self-gratification. It will never cease to amaze me when couples like this do what they did. It's bad enough when you have one person doing it, but 2, it just beggars belief. And I do hope the families of their victims are able to remember their loved ones for the good times. And I truly hope they have been able to go on and have beautiful, happy, fulfilling lives. And that's it, guys. Another episode of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans done and dusted. Thank you for your company. Thank you for listening to me. And if you are enjoying these episodes, if you are enjoying my podcast, please, shout outs is what makes the world go round. Get the word out there. Tell your friends, tell your neighbours, tell your workmates. Share me on social media. Do whatever you want to do. I so appreciate it. And until next time, guys, as always, thank you for listening. And stay safe, stay cool, and stay caffeinated. I will catch you all later.